We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 5 this morning. If you felt a little bit lost during the Lord's Prayer, don't worry, that was a technical glitch. Most of us probably felt lost to one degree or another. But as we're getting on track this morning, as we're thinking about different passages in the Bible, there are certain patterns, cliches, tropes that pop up in stories around the world, across ages and genres. Take, for instance, The Chosen One, in which an individual is selected by fate or unseen forces to save the city, the world, the universe. In our modern pop culture, think about The Matrix, The Wheel of Time, Harry Potter, or Dune. Or, more recently, there's an interesting trope called the Soul Triptych, a trio of main characters who represent heart, mind, and body. Think about Harry, Ron, and Hermione in Harry Potter, or Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in the original Star Trek. I'll give you one guess to figure out who the body one was in that. It was Kirk. Or going much further back, there's the brothers Alyosha, Ivan, and Dmitri, and the brothers Karamazov. I know, I had to mention them. We've got a lot of big Brothers Karamazov fans in the house. Definitely not just me. This morning, we're not dealing with a trope or a cliche or a pattern. What we're dealing with is more of a literary and historical echo. This is a place where two stories in the Bible have so much resonance with one another that I think looking at them at the same time might actually help us to understand both a little more fully. The first is the story that we just read, that we heard from the New Testament, the parable of the prodigal sons. A younger son lost to sin, and an older son lost to resentment and self-righteousness, and the loving Father who holds out grace and forgiveness to them both. The second story that we're going to read this morning is that of Naaman, and it is found in 2 Kings chapter 5. We're going to read the whole chapter as we get started here this morning. And I want us to be thinking as we read through, who do I recognize? Which characters in this story have a parallel to characters in the parable of the prodigal sons? So let's read 2 Kings chapter 5. We're going to read the whole chapter this morning and then dive in. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." And so he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" And so he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" And so he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him and said, Behold, I now know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he, Elisha, said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, If not, please, let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And Elisha said to him, Go in peace. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, See, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi followed Naaman. And when Naaman saw that someone was running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master has sent me to say, There have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. And Naaman said, Be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and laid them on 2 of his servants. And they carried them before Gehazi. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. He went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, Where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, Your servant went nowhere. But he said to him, Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence a leper like snow. The first person we meet in our story this morning is Naaman. And we are clearly supposed to read that he is hot stuff. He's the commander of the army of Syria. He's beloved by his king. He's a man of courage and valor. He gives kings pieces of paper, or papyrus. I didn't check that in the historical work this week. He gives them pieces of paper that make them tremble and fear. He can offer wealth and favor and privileges to anyone who gets him what he wants in life. He only bathes in the cleanest rivers. Naaman is the younger brother for our story. But Naaman has one surprising fact about him that doesn't match with all of the rest. He's a leper. He has leprosy. Leprosy was a catch-all term in the ancient world for a number of incurable skin conditions, the worst of which would eventually lead to death and would prevent close contact with others because of its contagious nature. Naaman's leprosy is kind of like the younger brother going broke in the parable of the prodigal sons. You get this character who seems invincible, who seems to have everything he could want, massive success in worldly terms, and then all of a sudden one thing goes wrong and the veneer of perfection is pierced and the cracks start shining through. We find out that the younger brother's well-being was dependent upon his wealth and that Naaman's well-being was dependent on his health. And in both cases, they realized that they must go and seek out the one who can restore them. For the younger brother, it was the father that he had wronged. And for Naaman, it is the prophet of the God whose people Naaman has made a wildly successful career of attacking. And for both of them, we find that humility becomes a critical component of their finding restoration. Naaman leaves for Israel. And honestly, as I'm reading the passage, for someone who is seeking help, for someone who is seeking aid, Man, Naaman sure starts off doing it in the most self-possessed, nose straight up in the air way possible. He says, I have my piles of treasure, I have my fine clothes, I have my servants and my porters to carry it all. I have a personal letter from my king, my friend, to the king of Israel, containing not a request, but a statement of expectation. I have sent Naaman to you that you might heal his leprosy. The king of Syria even phrases it like he is doing the king of Israel a favor in allowing him to serve in such a prestigious way. And the king of Israel is terrified because he can't do that. He doesn't have that power. He doesn't have that ability. He says, what am I supposed to do? Of course he can't. We humans cannot create our own restoration. We can't fix ourselves. That's a real common pattern throughout Scripture that we see showing up here again. But God can. And so Elisha, God's prophet and representative, says, send him to me. But when Naaman gets there, we find out that it's time for a lesson in humility for good old Naaman. Because the super, ultra, mega important Naaman himself, he receives a response to his healing demand, but not from Elisha. Instead, his servant walks out and says, hey, go jump in the river and you'll be good. Naaman, with his importance and his position, just gets, go wash in the river and you'll be good to go. This might seem like the easiest answer ever to a critical problem in someone's life. Imagine you're going through a horrible time, a health issue, a relationship struggle, a job situation, and you're told this will all get fixed if you just... Okay, sure, jump in a river. This one little easy thing. Go do this one little easy thing and everything will get taken care of. It seems like it's this easy thing. You and I might look at this and say, sign me up. Woo! How do I get answers like this more often? Let's go. But the funny thing is, if Naaman is going to say yes to this, then he has to believe and he has to admit within his own heart that the easy thing is enough and that the easy thing is all he needed. Let me try to rephrase this some to help us understand kind of the struggle that Naaman is facing here. We as human beings really like to prove our worth. It feels good to show off a skill, to prove an ability, for our work to be worth it and our struggle to pay off. Imagine if you were having that issue that you imagined earlier, work, family, health, whatever it is, and you put years of your life into fixing that problem. You tried everything, counseling, coaching, doctors, homeopathy, alternative medicine, alternative methods, alternative whatever, as long as it shows a smidgen of promise, and then someone steps in and says, oh, the answer is this easy thing, this little thing, this thing that you just never looked at. Just do that. You'll be good to go. And your work doesn't help. And all those things that you did were totally unnecessary. How would that make us feel? I think maybe, yes, there's some gratitude for a fix in there. Like, I'm grateful, at least there's an answer, sure. But wouldn't there also be some skepticism? Like, no, dude, I've been working at this for years and years and years, and you're saying I just need to do this little thing? What are you even talking about? How could it be so simple? How could it be so easy when I've been seeking for so long these answers? Am I being messed with? Am I being made fun of? I think there might also be some resentment. I've wasted so much time and energy and work and life on this for what? To find out that the solution is right there and it doesn't care how hard I've worked? And it doesn't care how smart or tough or strong or wealthy or good I am. It's available to anybody who will just go jump in the muddy water. The Jesus Storybook Bible is our family's favorite kids' story Bible. If you don't have a copy, I know there are at least 2 out here on the kids' shelf for free. And real quick pause, there's a resource shelf right as you walk out these doors to your right. that's a take stuff shelf. There's no library sign out. There's no leave $10 in the box. Take the stuff on the wall if it is helpful. There's a kids section, a youth section, an adult section. We would love for it all to just disappear. We'll fill it back in. Don't worry about it. Okay, unpause. In the Jesus Storybook Bible version of this story, they say that Naaman's healing was right there. It was within reach, but it required nothing of him. And nothing was the one thing he'd never had. Naaman had always been important. Naaman had always worked for it. Naaman had always shown how great he was in everything in life. You don't become the commander of the army in the powerful country who always wins at everything without being a high achiever. And Naaman had never had, no, I'm just giving it to you. If Naaman's answer is right there, it means that in taking it, he has to admit to himself that he might have been asking the wrong questions his entire life. And at first, he won't. He says, forget this. This stinks. I'm out of here. But if Naaman was missing nothing, there is one thing he did have that was really important. Naaman had good friends. See, Naaman's servants didn't just see him as a paycheck. If he was just a paycheck, they could have just followed. But instead, they care about him and his well-being, and they risk speaking up to him, and they say, whoa, whoa. Naaman, you would have done anything for this. Anything. You would have slain the mythological monster. You would have gone and conquered a kingdom. You would have gathered all the riches that you could get your hands on. And you won't do this because it's too small? Because it's too normal? Because it's too not Naaman-y? And thankfully for him, he listens. And so he obeys the words of the prophet. And Naaman finds healing. And the beautiful thing is Naaman finds healing not just for his skin, but for his heart. Because when we see him again, his pride has been broken down and healed the same way his skin has. And he demonstrates gratitude and humility when he is willing to listen to the prophet rather than having to dictate and be listened to. Because the lesson has been learned, humility has been acquired, Elisha now comes out himself to speak to Naaman. And Naaman tries to present offerings, to give back, to pay back Elisha for the healing. But Elisha knows that he and we need the lesson that this healing was about God's unmerited mercy, not Naaman's worth or deservedness or what he could do to pay it back. So Naaman declares his abiding allegiance to the Lord. And he says, can I get enough dirt that I can go home and build an altar there on the dirt to remember I am worshiping from now on the God of Israel? And Naaman leaves, he is granted the dirt, and he leaves. The end, great story, 5 stars. Right? Oh, but no. See, we had our younger brother, one who was wandering from far from the Father and must find humility in order to be restored and healed and made whole. We need an older brother. We need someone who stayed close to the Father, or his representative in this case, someone who had not wavered or wandered, but someone who, for all of that, is perhaps even more lost, because he had fully internalized and felt totally justified in his holding the exact same belief that Naaman walked into the situation with. My worth is proved by the things that I do. I earn the good things that I get in my life. For Naaman, he said, my worth is earned by my importance, my influence, the amount of wealth and power and prestige that I have. But for Gehazi, Elijah's servant, the older brother, it's his faithfulness. It's his obedience. Naaman comes in and he says, I want to buy my salvation with money and power and influence. Gehazi comes into the picture and says, I want to buy what I want out of this situation with my work and faithfulness and my toil. But both of them are looking in the wrong place. And Gehazi eventually gets frustrated when all the work and toil and faithfulness aren't getting him what he wants out of the equation. And he says to himself, my faithfulness means that I am owed, and so I'm going to go ahead and get what I want for myself. Gehazi slips out of Elisha's dwelling and lies to Naaman, saying, hey, Naaman, There were some needy travelers who showed up right after you left, and I could use some stuff for them. No, don't look back at the house. They didn't bring donkeys. They're inside already. They've vowed a vow of not being seen by people from Syria. Nope, you'll just have to give me the stuff, and I'll take it to them. It holds the thumbs up outside the door. Thanks, Naaman's servants. That's great. For those who were unpopular in high school, hear and know, the prophets in need are Gehazi's Canadian girlfriend. But anyway, Naaman, Gehazi's inventing this elaborate ruse about why he needs the money and the clothes and everything. Naaman's happy to give it back. Naaman wanted to give way more than that originally. He says, yes, I will do whatever you want. Let me give you more money than what you're asking for. And here's the thing. Just like in the parable of the prodigal sons, the older brother, in this case Gehazi, the older brother's resentment and sense of entitlement not only signal to us that he is lost too, that there's something broken in his heart too. That sense of resentment and entitlement can actually be something that harms and hurts the newfound faith of the younger brother. Because think about Naaman in this situation. He was just taught this crucial lesson about humility. He just learned that his wholeness is a gift from God and it's impossible for him to earn it. And then minutes later, he is seemingly delivered a divine chance to earn that healing, just a little bit. Think about how that could twist and warp his budding faith as he goes back to Syria, thinking in his head, oh no, I am allowed to give things back. I am allowed to earn it. I am allowed. That's what's expected of me. It's funny how often biblical stories about God's grace involve somebody getting big time mad about that grace being given to someone else. The parable of the prodigal son, the story of Jonah coming up in a few weeks here, the parable of the 11th hour laborers in the New Testament. And here in Naaman's story, Gehazi looks at Naaman getting this undeserved grace and he says, see, my master has spared that Syrian. Like, can you hear the seething anger in those lines, the rage at what God has done? And that kind of, God's grace can be infuriating. And that fury, that anger can even make sense. It can be totally logical. Remember, Syria regularly raided and attacked Israel. It's totally possible that a military force led by Naaman had killed someone that Gehazi knew. Of course he'd want him to pay. There's only one real defense against this totally understandable desire for payback in our lives. And it is to see clearly and fully just how much we would have to pay, and yet have not and do not and will not if it weren't for the grace of God. It's for us Gehazis to realize that we are sinners in God's eyes as well. That in fact our forgiveness, our closeness to the Father was not free. Someone paid for it. And so we cannot exact a price from others when we paid no price ourselves. That's why Gehazi is so settled on Naaman paying a price, while at the same time saying, I deserve the free stuff that I can get from Naaman. Gehazi had tricked himself into thinking, I don't really need mercy. I've earned all the good things that I've received in my life. It's just because I'm so great. And the tragic reality is that Naaman had been sick inside and out, and he finds healing for both. But Gehazi was sick on the inside, and because he refused to see it, or deal with it, his outside ended up matching. But there's one last note this morning. There's a third character here in the story who creates a fascinating parallel from Naaman's story to the parable of the prodigal sons. And it's not who you think. And you might say to me, John, you don't know who I think. And that's possible, but I think you think Elisha. I think you think we're going to talk about Elisha and the father, because that's what I thought too when I was first doing prep for this sermon. And I thought, come on, John, real sermons have 3 points. How are you going to land this plane? Don't get me wrong. Elisha and the father in the parable are a parallel to each other. Elisha serves as the representative of God here in the Old Testament. He is the one who holds out the possibility of forgiveness to the younger brother and who declares that the older brother is lost and is not going to come back into a right place without repentance. There is a very real parallel there. But Elisha is not who I want to talk about. I want to talk about Naaman's servant girl. Because in the parable of the prodigal sons, there is a person missing. There is a role that is never filled, a character who never shows up. It's a third brother. There needs to be a third brother. There needs to be a faithful brother. There needs to be a compassionate brother. There needs to be a truly and wholly good brother. A brother who is wronged by the younger brother's pride, but in humility and compassion and love goes and seeks out the younger brother and brings him back. He shouldn't have been left way on his own. Someone should have gone and gotten him. And a brother who sees the older brother's pride and anger and resentment driving him in the wrong direction as well, but who in compassion leaves the party himself to go out into the darkness to console and also maybe a little bit set straight the older brother in his resentment, in his anger, in his pride. That character, that brother, is missing in the parable of the prodigal sons. Think about why. Why is he missing? He's missing because he's the one telling the story. Jesus is telling his listeners, I am the good brother. I am the one that you know you need. That someone who has come to find you in your lostness, your brokenness. The good shepherd who leaves the 99 to go and find the lost. Someone who will say, I will not leave you in your brokenness, whether you are near or far. I will seek you and find you. That character is missing in the parable of the prodigal son, but there is someone who fills that role here in Naaman's story. A character who is wronged by the lost brother and yet in unmerited grace forgives. A character who, despite the unworthiness of the lost person, directs them back to the source of salvation and healing and wholeness. Naaman has a Jesus here in the passage. Let's read verses 2 through 4 again. Let us go, I flipped the page. I need to go back one. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. And so Naaman went in and told his Lord, thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. The servant girl is a victim of kidnapping, of Naaman and his people's greed and violence. Her family was likely either killed or also carried off into slavery somewhere else in Syria. This is a war captive being used for slave labor, and I don't care how well they're treating her in comparison to other masters in Syria. This is her enemy. They have robbed her of her family. They have inflicted physical violence upon her and those that she loves. This is people who have captured and kept her to work for them. And what does she do? Does she see this wasting disease as some form of karmic retribution for what has been done wrong to her and hers? Does her heart take joy day after day in seeing this man who hurt and kidnapped her breaking down into eventual death and ruin? Do you know what she does? Verse 3, oh, would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would be cured. There is no reason for this. This isn't rational. This isn't a hostage situation. She doesn't hold this healing hostage. She doesn't say, I know how you can get healed, and you release me and everybody I care about and let us go back to Israel, and then we'll tell you when we get to the border. There's no earning it. There's no reward offer. There's no promise made. Naaman has done nothing to earn it. If anything, Naaman deserves the exact opposite of what he gets here. Naaman, for his war crimes against God's people, deserves everything he's getting and then some. And yet he has shown the grace of God when the one he harmed and hurt and sinned against turns toward him and somehow has love and care and concern in her eyes. This choice makes no sense in the eyes of the world because it is something that is too much, too grand, too powerful for this world. It is one of the 1,000 pictures that God has scattered on every page of his word that says this isn't just a story. This is where the arc of the universe is meant to bend. This is where all of the stories are going. This is the whisper behind every great tale in human history. This is showing you the way to the hero with 1,000 faces. Because this love was pointing toward the ultimate version of itself when it was displayed for us on a cross. When the Son of God looked at us, all of us, and said, "You have wronged me, you have denied me, you have spurned me, you have chosen other saviors instead of me, and it will not stop me from loving you. It cannot stop me from loving you because my love for you isn't dependent on you, it's dependent on me, and I will never run out." And somehow, despite all our brokenness and our sinfulness and our ugly hate and anger and everything else, Jesus looked at us and there was love and care and concern in his eyes. The servant girl is like Naaman's Jesus. She is the one in the passage who teaches us about the overwhelming love of our Lord. But friends, there's one small step further that we need to take. Because if the servant girl is our picture of Jesus here in the passage, then we need to remember that our major call in life as Christians is to become more and more who God has made us to be. And a huge part of that is becoming more and more like Jesus. In our readings in Matthew 5 this week, Jesus challenged the prevailing wisdom of his day, which is still the prevailing wisdom of our day. He said, starting in verse 43, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.'" And that's still the prevailing sentiment today. Love the people who love you, forget the people who don't, etc. "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust." The servant girl is, I think, one of the most profound images that we have in all of Scripture of what Jesus is talking about in that passage. She gives us a window into what it really looks like if we are truly and miraculously loving our enemies. And while we will never do it perfectly, we lean in faith on the one who did do it perfectly, who gave his life for his enemies, and in whose perfect righteousness we cling to forgiveness, and in whom we seek to grow into who God has made us to be.